Before this breaking analysis begins, take 1 second, right now. Subscribe, like this video, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because what is about to be discussed is not small. It is not normal. It would shake the world in ways few events ever have. Stop everything. Imagine waking up to this headline. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for the sitting President of the United States, Donald Trump. Not a rumor, not a leak. A formal warrant. Signed, announced, public. If that happened, the world would freeze. The International Criminal Court, often called the ICC, is based in The Hague. It prosecutes war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. It does not go after small cases. It goes after leaders, generals, presidents. Now, imagine the ICC saying it believes there is evidence of premeditated murder involving the supreme leader of Iran. That word alone, premeditated, would send shockwaves across every capital city on Earth. Markets would react within minutes. Stocks would drop, oil prices would spike, newsrooms would explode with breaking coverage. Allies would demand clarity. Rivals would watch closely. But here is the first hard truth. The United States is not a member of the ICC. That changes everything. Because the United States is not a member of the ICC, the court has no direct power to arrest a sitting U.S. president on American soil. 0. U.S. law enforcement would not move on that warrant. But the moment that president steps into a country that recognizes ICC authority, the risk changes. More than 120 countries are members of the ICC, many are close U.S. allies. That means travel becomes a legal trap. If such a warrant existed, every planned international trip would turn into a crisis meeting. Could the president visit Europe? Could he attend a G7 summit? Could he travel to Canada? Each nation would face a choice. Honor the warrant or refuse it. And that decision would not just be legal, it would be political. If a country refused to act, critics would say it ignored international law. If it tried to enforce the warrant, it would trigger the largest diplomatic standoff in modern history. Inside the United States, the political earthquake would be immediate. Congress would split along sharp lines. Some lawmakers would call the warrant an attack on American sovereignty. Others would demand investigations at home. The Department of Justice would be under intense pressure. Could U.S. courts open their own inquiry? Would the Supreme Court be forced to weigh in? And then there is the Constitution. A sitting president has broad protections while in office. Impeachment would instantly enter the national conversation. Not as theory, as emergency debate. Cable news would run nonstop coverage. Protesters would gather in major cities. Supporters would defend the president fiercely. Critics would demand accountability. The country would not just debate policy, it would debate identity. Now turn to Iran. If the supreme leader of Iran had been killed in a targeted action, and the ICC framed it as murder, the Middle East would enter a dangerous moment. Iran would call it proof of aggression. Hardliners would demand retaliation. Regional militias could mobilize. Oil shipping routes in the Persian Gulf could be threatened. Global energy prices would jump overnight. Allies in the region would raise defense levels. Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, all would prepare for possible escalation. The Pentagon would shift assets. Naval fleets would reposition. Air defense systems would activate. One legal document from The Hague could move warships across oceans. Now consider America's allies. European leaders would walk a tightrope. They support international law. Many strongly back the ICC, but they also rely on the United States for defense and trade. Would they publicly support the warrant or call for calm and investigation? NATO would face its most serious political test in decades. The alliance is built on unity. A legal accusation against its most powerful member would strain that unity. Meanwhile, rivals like China and Russia would seize the moment. They would question American leadership. They would frame it as decline, as instability. This is why such a hypothetical warrant would not be just a legal matter. It would be a global power shift. And this would only be the beginning. Now think about the White House itself. If such a warrant were announced, the president would stand before the American people. The message would be firm. The message would be defiant. The argument would be simple. The United States does not answer to a foreign court. Supporters would call it political warfare. They would say global institutions are targeting American power. They would frame it as an attack on voters who chose their leader. Opponents would say something different. They would argue that no leader is above the law, not at home, not abroad. The country would not just argue about one event. It would argue about the meaning of justice. Cabinet officials would hold urgent meetings. Intelligence leaders would assess risks. Military commanders would review global threats. The government would move into crisis mode, and all of it would unfold in public view. Then comes the legal battle. International law experts would debate jurisdiction. Could the ICC legally claim authority? On what grounds? Was the act committed on territory that gives the court power? Did allied nations refer the case? These questions would dominate headlines. At the same time, American constitutional scholars would debate executive power. Does a president have immunity from foreign prosecution while in office? Can Congress act? Can impeachment move forward based on international charges? The Supreme Court of the United States could be pulled into history once again. Every ruling would be watched around the world. And while lawyers argue, global tension would not pause. Financial markets would remain unstable. Investors hate uncertainty. And this would be uncertainty at the highest level of power. The dollar could face pressure. Oil prices could swing wildly. Retirement accounts could feel the shock. Ordinary people would ask simple questions. Is the country safe? Will that be war? What happens next? Airlines might review routes. Corporations might delay investments. Diplomats would work the phones day and night trying to calm partners and prevent escalation. The world economy is connected. When the United States shakes, everyone feels it. Now consider the military dimension. If the alleged act involved a targeted strike, military lawyers would analyze rules of engagement. Was it an act of war? Was it self-defense? Was Congress informed? Defense officials would brief lawmakers in secure rooms. Intelligence agencies would protect classified details. Every word spoken publicly would be measured carefully. Meanwhile, Iran and its allies would test boundaries. Cyber attacks could increase. Proxy groups could threaten American interests overseas. The risk of miscalculation would rise. History shows that when powerful nations clash over law and force, small mistakes can grow fast. And finally, think about the long term. If a sitting U.S. president faced an international arrest warrant, it would change global politics for years. Future presidents would rethink foreign policy decisions. International courts would gain or lose credibility based on how this crisis ends. The balance between national power and global law would be tested like never before. Would the warrant stand? Would it collapse under political pressure? Would negotiations quietly reshape the outcome? One thing is certain. Such a moment would mark a turning point. It would force nations to choose between loyalty and law, between power and principle. And the world would never look at leadership the same way again. That is why, even as a hypothetical, this scenario demands attention, because it reveals how fragile the global order can be when law, politics, and power collide at the highest level.